Yeah, ever since that one meeting where it was like, and Chase, I love your thumbnails. It's like Spinoza, the Jewish Nazi. What? Like, what the fuck? I thought that was really funny, and I also like the next one, like genital mutilation. What's going on? It's like maybe one person is gonna look at it and be like, okay, I will click on this 2 hour video of nothing or
Yeah,
almost nothing.
so I was hoping that they would go viral. That was my inadequate hope.
You
And I
know,
think I think actually the last one because I was trying to make it just like seem ridiculous, so people would click on it and be like, "What's going on here?" I don't know, there wasn't even really much of a reason. It was just like, "Oh, this is fun." So I tried to make them stand out as much as possible and be as absurd as possible. And think the last one actually had a little more people than usual. I think it was some 50 views, 60 something, which is a little more than normal.
that's crazy.
So
Yeah.
we got some kind of an audience.
Yeah, I still wonder if that guy that like sent me texts about how much he hated my interpretation of Zizek, like if he was a part of our fan base. And if he still is to this day. And if so,
Yeah,
hi.
yeah, there's that one. I can't remember his name. Something to do with a rose, I think.
Rose-colored glasses.
Yeah, that's it.
I love
Who
that guy.
would he would comment on the Hegel videos. And okay, so for people to know this, he was Hunter's nemesis. And just
Yeah.
I don't know, he just hated Hunter's interpretation of Hegel. And he would always, okay, I think this only occurred maybe two or three times, but he would pick somebody that I guess said something counter to Hunter and like proclaim this person the hero. I think it was Eric one week, another week it
Yeah.
was Joey or something. I don't know, but he would write like a solid 2 pages in a comment about, yeah, Hegel.
Right.
And like, okay.
And they're well, I will say I felt kind of bad because I felt kind of like, that scene in Mad Men when Don Draper's talking to this guy in the elevator, and this guy's like, I I spend I've spent so much time trying to get to where I am, and you had to do so little to get to where you are. And do you have any idea how much it hurts to look at guys like you who don't deserve to be where they are? And his response is like, I don't really think about you much at all. I'm sorry. I don't really know who are you? And he's like, that's kind of how I always was like, I should have given more time and attention to those comments. If he, she, they, them, it, that whoever is watching this, I didn't read most of those comments. I should have, to like know why you disagree, because you were so passionate that it was like maybe I was really, wrong about something. But I didn't, and I'm sorry, and I probably won't. Maybe I could. Whatever. Moving forward. Yeah, and also we have, and I think that rose-colored glasses person like joined the Discord and then did not much. But then I have some other people have been joining. This one person, Alan, joined. They're interested in Hegel, and then this other person, like the Wanderer or whatever. I don't know who that is, but I just wanted to say, since we're starting this thing about Spinoza, I wanted to talk about why I'm interested in Schopenhauer, and two, how I'm feeling about this book. And it's that since that last meeting where I accused Spinoza of opening the door to brutal, power centric, authoritarian, violent philosophy, state philosophy, valorizing domination above all else. I really, I in a way I did. But ever since then, the last two sections that we've read, I've enjoyed a lot more. I've enjoyed like a lot, not because I believe that and it's made a lot more sense. No, it's because Chase was willing to take the time and be like, okay, sure, let's entertain the idea that Spinoza is like Hitler. Okay, all right, let's go through why he isn't. Let's talk about that. and just kind of slowly walked me through some stuff, and it's starting to really make a lot more sense. And I've just really found a lot to appreciate in these last two pieces. And I'm also like studying for the LSAT, which is in a week and like 2 days. And that has made me feel a lot of complex, strong feelings. A lot of which is despair and anger and sadness and resignation. And Spinoza's been there for me a little bit. He's been like, hey, come on, man. Just, you need to depend less on hope and free yourself from fear. And I was like, damn, you're kind of right for that. You're speaking some sense. I've also been like reading like Japanese samurai philosophy. Like I just a bunch of like, I've been really trying to like steel my soul against this big cause of. I've also been working like a ton at this bullshit stupid job at Office Depot. If anybody from Office Depot ever sees this, I want you to know that I hate that job, and probably you. Most of the people there that I work with, I don't like, and the job I don't like, and there's nothing about it that I enjoy. I have a boss who comes up to me and is like, "Hey, you're getting higher numbers on your reward signups. That's great, but you can do this and this to get higher." And I want to be like, "Look, I don't care like at all, like at all, at all, at all, at all. Like, why would I ever? Like, I don't nothing, whatever." I totally abandon any hope or fear in that building. As soon as I walk into Office Depot, I'm free from fear and hope. I conquer my fortune. I don't care at all what happens. I just let it all happen like water. Yeah, seriously. It's like chasing lows. I feel like it's a similar story. Yeah, a dark time. But so what I'm interested in about like this work and Schopenhauer, this is kind of my segue. It's actually kind of somewhat of a natural segue to some questions and some things I find interesting in this passage and in this part. You can't write the F word. Chase is trying to write the F word in the Zoom chat and is being thwarted. And is experiencing some sadness due to a disconsonant or like a discordant rhythm, speed, and size assailing him from the body external.
My action is definitely being restrained here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but we know what you put, and it wasn't that the way the Hebrew they didn't use vowels. People knew what they were saying anyway.
Oh yeah, Yahweh.
Yeah,
is just like YH.
Yeah, they
WH.
aspirated the vowels in at least in the ancient Hebrew in the Bible. Yeah.
Watched a really cool video about Yahweh because he was like a storm god. Esoterica. Been watching a lot of his stuff.
Yeah. Okay, I was about to say, yeah.
Really cool stuff. By the way, also formal invitation. I was thinking about starting a cult to Jupiter. If anybody's interested, we might get together, do some shrooms, drink some punch, maybe maybe grill, eat some ribs. I don't know, burn some stuff. Who knows? Just a formal invitation. Just anybody who's interested. Let's talk. DM me after. I was thinking about that at work, actually. I was like, should I do that? I don't know, something happened in my brain that made me think like maybe I should do that, but then I thought maybe not, because I want to be a lawyer. And I thought that might.
So you're essentially kind of recreating a worship of Zeus at that point, right?
Yeah.
Jupiter is Zeus.
Right.
So okay, but why Jupiter specifically? What I know about Jupiter in terms of these things relevant to that would be Jupiter is usually associated with good fortune,
right?
And prosperity and these great stuff. It accelerates joy, I guess.
Yeah. I suppose. Yeah. In theory, the practice of commitment to Jupiter would improve my relation or understanding of the necessity of reality. In response to Christian's question, how would it do that? Yeah, the prosperity doctrine. Yeah, really sticky. Like really. Well, I just thought that it was the reason it actually initially entered my brain. This is so afield, but the reason it initially, I'm drinking a Miller High Life, by the way. It entered my mind because I was thinking about two thoughts. One, I don't see positive, like, hey, positive religion, like a sort of institutional religion, as generally being very productive. And I don't think Spinoza did either. That's a segue. That's a connector. Hey, Spinoza was pretty critical of positive and institutional religion, calling it a useful fiction and so on. And I like Jesus. I think he was a cool dude. And I like the story. I like the the Bible. I like the what's going on in there. And there plenty to learn. Pretty wacky mythopoetic landscape. Yeah, but I think that in the story of the parts that I like about Christianity are like the capacity for it to persist in the wake of the destruction of a necessity of a big other, like an external grounding power to justify or contextualize the events or actions taken in one's life. Because it's like, that's what Hegel says, the God of the beyond died on the cross. But then I was like, and that's why I think that statement, I think, is generally why I think it's so ridiculous when people say things like, I'm going to start a cult of Jupiter. Because when you think that, you think of like D&D nerds getting together and dressing up in like velveteen robes and, smoking hookah in the woods and maybe having sex or something. And it's just the most embarrassing, pathetic mess ever. It's 2023. We're all over this. None of you are convinced of any of this stuff. Maybe you are a little bit, but come on. It's like a guy in a kilt is there and he's like talking to you about like, well, kilts by in and of themselves are not.
What's the problem with kilts, Hunter?
I met a guy who was really proud of his kilt, and he was part of the Texas State Pagan Club, and he had a lot of problems with his personality that I didn't mesh with. And it wasn't the kilt itself, but the kilt was an indicator of something dire. We were in Texas.
No. Kilt's not an indicator of something dire.
Fine. I'll concede that point.
I do. I own a kilt. I graduated from Edinburgh University in my kilt. I was married in my kilt. I still have a kilt.
Fair enough. But I would say, okay, let's say
some of us someone could tell that you did own a kilt just by the way you responded.
Right.
To it. It was like
I also have dear friendships with men who wear kilts. I had my best memories.
Some of my best friends.
Yeah, that's right. Some of my best friends are men who wear kilts.
I affirm Eric's kilt. I just want to put that as on the official record here. I'm gonna side with Team Kilt on this.
Oh, look, I'm just saying that doing things like praying to Jupiter generally embarrassing and is associated in my mind with other somewhat embarrassing behaviors. And like wearing, like, let's say like a suede cape, or something like that. And it's, you're like Dracula. And it's like, come on, I don't know. Look, it's fun. And I wish I could do it. I wish I could do it and not look weird, but I choose not to. I choose to dress normal. All right. The point is, I'm very
surprised that you would use that word
normal
in that context.
Right.
What in the hell is normal with clothing in human history?
Whatever
you
gets me
just
the
can't.
least
You don't
attention.
think you could pull off wearing a cape? That's why you don't do it. Let's be honest.
That's right. Definitely not. And I think most people who try are met with the equivalent of metaphorical rotten tomatoes getting thrown at them.
Did Spinoza play fashion police?
Spinoza actually wore a really cool cape that he got like almost stabbed in. I remember that. But my point is, I just thought it would be an interesting experiment to say, would it be possible to do that sort of thing in a totally straight, like play it straight kind of way, not embarrassing, not just LARPers who are, people who are bored on a weekend who are trying to get together and drink and try to justify it with some sort of pseudo mystical, like, oh, we do tarot and stuff. I was wondering if it would be possible to really, really be into it. Like, you know what I mean? And anyway, that's a hypothetical. Moving on.
Wait, hold
What?
Hunter.
What?
So
We just on this now.
it sounds like you're talking about just kind of like a modern neo-paganism almost.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. I'll say I have friends that are very into that.
I do too.
So and I like occultism. I love anything esoteric. Well, not anything, but
Right. I guess
um
I've
yeah,
just
it's
had
good. I like
right.
it. Just it's complex with regards of, you know, doing some kind of a ritual to some deity that you're not going to conceive of as existing in some kind of a literal fashion, like people would understand some kind of deity existing.
Right.
That it is complex, but um, I think chaos magic has some good ideas for that. It also goes into, you know, you're talking about CCRU, Nicolan kind of stuff. I think there's something like that too.
I guess
The
it's sort of like the difference between okay, Discordianism is really interesting, and I think it's like a really fascinating project that was done in a really fascinating way by some interesting people, and it had some interesting results, and it was just really cool. But then like Matt Squires gave me this book called The Necronomicon. And it's this guy, literally the intro is like, for all the accursed souls who dare to peer into this dark grimoire. And it's like, okay. And it's like written anonymously, but everybody knows who it is. This guy who went by he calls himself I am Simon, you know, the anthologist. And it's like some guy who's a professor of like occult history in like California or something. And it's like, okay, this is fun, whatever. It's just, you know what I mean? It's like there's a little bit of the magic is it's like there's a difference between a Roman person who is like, if you tell me you don't believe in Jupiter, I'm gonna cut your head off, versus somebody who's like in a contemporary setting, who's like, yeah, I'm really into like, you know, I have like yeah, it's that exact copy. It's that exact copy of the Necronomicon. I have the exact one. Matt Squires gave it to me, and I leafed through it, and I was like, "Oh, brother, I don't know, whatever." But maybe that's just how much jaded I am, and it's because of my Hegel reading, where he says things that make fun of palmistry and things like that. And I liked that about him. I liked that part of the phenomenology where he's like, "Listen, okay, saying X, Y, or Z is basically like saying that you could read my fortune or tell me that I'm going to get married because I have a crease in my hand, or that it rains every time you put your laundry out." Okay, like he's really trying to be like. Yeah, I thought that was it was interesting how ahead of his time that criticism was, and I think that the direction that I go in, right, or that I've generally gone in this sort of Hegelian strand. This is the way to get back to it, so we can get off of this train. Is
wait,
it's okay?
I feel like I need
One
to
more.
possibly correct
Got
you
it.
about the
Okay,
Necronomicon.
got it.
Um,
Please.
so that was made as okay. So the Necronomicon it first appears in H.P. Lovecraft's
Right.
work as a
Right.
fictional book,
Yes.
where it's just supposed to be this book that if you read it, you get sucked into I don't know, summoning these deities from another world, and actually they live, I think like in the center of the bottom of the ocean. Yeah,
Right.
the elder ones,
And you have
whatnot.
dreams of Rilaye, the city of madness, and whatever, and the mad Arab who wrote those notes, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so it comes from H.P. Lovecraft, just a fictional book, but then somebody actually turned it into a book, but it's kind of ridiculous. So I watched Esoterica, that guy Justin Sledge, he
Right.
he had a video segment on the Necronomicon. I watched it and it was quite interesting. So there was an occult order. They made that book as a test, apparently, for would-be initiates. And the idea was that they needed to reject it because it's a piece of shit. So it doesn't have a proper way of banishing, is one thing that was mentioned, but there's various things that don't make any sense in it. And a good initiate apparently would recognize these things and reject it. And that was why it was made. But then somebody apparently took it from there and was like, this is commercial value or something. And they turned it into a huge bestseller. It sold like a lot. And then became, yeah, it got wrapped up in its own kind of hyperstitional reality of being the fictional book that, now you even see, there's all these movies that the Evil Dead and what are some other ones that mention the Necronomicon. People think it's a real book,
Yeah.
and then it turned it now it is a real book, but it's not the real book. It's like, what's going on now? I don't know. It's pretty crazy, but that's the history of it. It was okay. So also so I watched this video. This professor, he goes through it and talks about how there's tons of incorrect information in it that it uses. It says it's Sumerian, and then it'll use all these things from not Sumeria, uses like Greek and as like 5 different languages, and it's all over the place. But still, I think it's entertaining. I don't know. Yeah, there you go.
I find the first couple paragraphs entertaining, and then I'm like, okay, you know what I mean? I guess maybe that's my problem. Maybe I'm stunted in a particular way that keeps me from penetrating into this more diverse and interesting body of literature and the what's the philology of it, rather than the philosophy of it, But I think that I find it interesting, I guess, that you have these interests already. This is going back to like the Spinoza and the Schopenhauer thing, because I guess from right, just exactly. I guess from an early age, I was interested in things like that, and just kind of searching for some sort of substantial basin of meaning, whether it be mystical or not, and then I think I really moved away from mysticism in my exposure to Hegel and his association with the Enlightenment, strong commitments to the principles of the Enlightenment, the contingency of truth and knowledge and of our experience, and in general a rejection of things like palmistry, however diverse and interesting those topics may be. Right, and it, like, I read some Christian mysticism in the form of Thomas Merton, which was given to me by Nevitt. I finished that however many, a while ago, and that's really cool. Mysticism itself can be really cool. Sufism is awesome. Thomas Merton's great. Mystics are cool. But I will say it's definitely the place to go. If there's anywhere on earth you want to go, if you're a charlatan and a liar and a loser and a cheater and a greaseball, I'd say really, 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 really good place to go is to open up like a soy-based candle and palm reading shop. I think I would probably, but that's a really good direction. But that being said, it's not a critique of the field as a whole. It's just an explanation as to my general aversion to really dedicating lots of time to picking through the content to find the gems. Esoterica does that for me. But anyway, the thing that I'm interested in, this is why I was talking about Schopenhauer right through this, is that I'm just interested, I guess. I see this trajectory. I see this general trajectory among a number of, or not necessarily a trajectory, but I guess I don't know. I guess I see this maybe I'm seeing a pattern that's not there. I'm copying this YouTube link you just posted, but I guess I see this strain, this interesting strain, kind of unfurling or presenting itself through this consistency, I guess, between authors like Spinoza, right? Descartes, Spinoza, Kant, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Deleuze, you know, there's kind of there's a lineage there. There's an intellectual history of borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. Schopenhauer hated Hegel. And Kant was really displeased with Fichte and thought that the concept of the Wissenschaftslehre was like ridiculous and like a total misunderstanding of certain parts of his philosophy. At least it said so in some letters that I read of his. Where he was like frustrated with Fichte's writing because he thought, oh, Fichte's like lost the plot, you know. So there's a divergence here going on, and there's these multiple pathways that I think an intellectual history can be drawn upon, right? I find this pathway interesting, right? In the sense that I know you, and I know that you and a lot of people whom I trust as being very reasonable, intelligent people, very interested in, and in fact, find a lot of salient, worthwhile, cogent philosophical content as being present in that lineage of work, you know. Whereas, you know, Hegel and certain Hegelians say, yeah, Schopenhauer was pretty fundamentally confused on certain elements, you know. And Schopenhauer and certain Schopenhauerians and Nietzsche would say Hegel is a total douchebag and I hate him, and you know, whatever. That, which, I mean, I don't think anybody can really, you know, like argue that Nietzsche and Schopenhauer didn't have really sour feelings towards Hegel, at least through a lot of their present and a lot of their writing. At least maybe they loved him in secret, but I doubt it. I guess I've got my bent, right. And I noticed that, and yeah, there are significant Hegelian elements in Egypt, for sure, absolutely. And I argue for that all day. When we read the Gay Science, I'm like, there's one, and there's one, and blah, blah, blah. But it just seems like maybe, well, whatever. I'm gonna leave that aside. My personal feelings on intellectual drama. Yeah, and in Birth of Tragedy, which he later denounces, boy, you know. But so you see. I guess I wonder throughout this lineage how consistent it is and how many parts stay within the rest of the puzzle. Hegel really likes Spinoza as well, but I know that there's a lot in here. I know, given my familiarity with Hegel, I can point to the things that we've read, and I'm not going to say here that I totally understand the work in front of us, but I'll also say I didn't outright hate it this time. I actually really liked it. I was just interested. And so the questions I'm going to raise here are not out of like an attempt to get one over on Spinozism, but just out of curiosity, because I know that there are certain elements here that kind of surprised me, right? And I know that in Hegelian thought and theory, there are alternative ideas on these topics and maybe even rejections of some of the Spinozist lines of thinking that are present here, right? And I'll start with one, because one of them, this one I think might be easier. The other one's kind of harder. I've got two. I got two things that really kind of I didn't know what to make of, I suppose. The first one I think I think is more important. I think it's maybe more complex, even though it's also simpler. And it's and also I guess I'll just run through like really briefly my understanding of what's going on here and see if what I'm saying is actually like kind of off base or out of touch with what's going on. But it seems like we're kind of still plodding along through the section of human bondage, and we're discussing God, reason, the good, virtue. Right, that's kind of how this section opens up: is virtue, love, God, the greatest goods of reason being commonly available and enjoyable by all. This is where I think, Chase, this is what reminded me of that Spinoza's communism you talked about, right, which certain people are kind of committed to or interested in. And to seek the good is to wish it for oneself and all other men. But then some interesting things were said. One of those things that was really interesting, well, I mean, it's all interesting, but one thing that was really interesting is this statement: people cooperate in society for fear of greater harm. I don't think that's exactly how he put it, but that's basically how I got a certain section of this. And I don't, again, like I might, like seriously, that might just be not at all what he's saying, but it seemed like, yeah, it was on page 136. Let's see, Proposition 38. Proposition 38 in the midst of Proposition 38, Scholium 2, seems like he's saying everyone refrains from doing harm out of timidity regarding a greater harm. That seems to me to be a statement like a sort of Hobbesian thing. People cooperate in society for fear of greater harm. Threats are used to restrain the effects. And this basically, and I don't know if he said it outright. I actually don't remember if he used this word directly, but it seemed like me like that was Spinoza's description of what a state is. That's a state. A state is an establishment that lays down certain threats used to restrain effects and to manually install a cooperation in people in society for fear of greater harm. Okay, so if we can agree on that, that's not totally wild or misreading, a total misreading. He then goes on to say something that I think is very interesting. And this is all kind of after another thing that I thought was kind of weird, but anyway, the thing that the thing that I thought was kind of weird that I don't think is all that important to really dive into, because I'm sure that I've got this kind of wrong, is the unmanly compassion thing, the rights of lower animals. Remember that part where he's like, the lower animals don't have any rights, fuck them, they're stupid. My immediate thought was like, what about disabled people and babies? Which is the most obvious like intro ethics question, right? It's like, well, if you don't like animals, then and it's because of how stupid they are. What do you think about the disabled or the profoundly impaired or the young or the stupid? You know what I mean? But I'm sure that there's a pretty easy answer to that, so we don't really have to like worry about that too much. What I'm more interested in is in Proposition 40. After this whole discussion of the state, or this basically laying out this definition of the state, Proposition 40 is on page 138, and on page 138 on Proposition 40, he says, things which are of assistance to the common society of men, or which bring it about that men live harmoniously, are useful. Those, on the other hand, are evil, which bring discord to the state. Let's see. For things which bring it about that men live harmoniously, at the same time bring it about that they live according to the guidance of reason, and so they are good. And on the other hand, those are evil, which arouse discord. I guess that's a fun image. Thank you, Chase. But my question here is, two questions. You guys ever read Confucius? And if the answer to that question is, we could, because whatever the answer is to that, that sounds very similar to Confucius. And Confucius is a very conservative Chinese philosopher who, and in fact, if you Google the phrase harmonious society, right, the very first thing that pops up is a Wikipedia entry for harmonious society is a socioeconomic concept in China recognized as a response to the increased alleged social injustice and inequality emerging in mainland Chinese society, which has led to social conflict. The concept of social harmony dates back to ancient China, to the time of Confucius. As a result, the philosophy has been characterized as a form of Neo-Confucianism. In modern times, it developed into a key feature of General Secretary Hu Jintao's signature ideology, the scientific development concept developed in the mid-2000s, reintroduced by the Hu Wen administration to the 2005 National People's Congress. My point is, I think that a Hegelian line of reasoning can pretty quickly rub up against the concept of the harmonious society, can start saying, oh, that's a fun concept, let's chew on it, and starts chewing on it. But like bubble gum, by the time it's chewed on but for a mere second, it takes on a whole new shape, and it doesn't seem so harmonious anymore. The basics of the harmonious society being, what brings a society harmony? The establishment of a society, right? It's a society, so there are social roles or elements that operate in accordance with the other social roles or elements as they are prefigured by the edifice of the society. And what that means is the social roles and pieces and parts at play do their job, and they do it well. Teachers are good teachers, mothers are good mothers, fathers are good fathers, blah, 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 right? The society is harmonious. It is in harmony, right? The first issue with this, right, is the just really hardcore conservatism kind of pushed forward by the harmonious society. Really hardcore conservative bent to the valorization of the harmonious society. Sure, and it's it's like Plato's not exactly a very progressive, 21st, like Hegelian guy. I mean, he's certainly progressive in a lot of ways. Yes, women can do good stuff, and he doesn't talk about, and I think he's better than Aristotle in certain ways. Aristotle said that a slave is a tool with a mind, and to be woman is to be without. And so I have bigger problems with Aristotle, frankly, than I do with. I like a lot of Plato, but I'm not going to pretend, that he's got everything figured out exactly as I like it, or that I've got him totally figured out exactly as he would like me to. Maybe he and I would have some disagreements, right? Sure, yeah, and relative to his society, rather progressive. Yes, I totally agree. Yes, I totally agree. I guess by a 21st century standard, but like no duh, right? So right, I'm with you, but I'm saying this notion of social harmony, right? We can see where it's been tried, and I hate to do the reductio ad Hitlerium again, but it's like, certainly different. Nice try, Chase. You almost got me there with that little bait in the chat. But there's, I think, reason to believe that like a fascist revolution, at least as far as I've heard it conceived, and I'm borrowing this conception of like a fascist revolution from like Zizek and even a conservative voice like Leo Strauss. Leo Strauss is very conservative, I think, and by anybody's standard. I mean, he's pretty conservative, but saying things like a fascist revolution is a revolution in the means of production of technology and infrastructure, but a preservation of traditional modes of property relations and of social hierarchies, right? So there's that element, this traditional preservation of hierarchies and social relations. Mothers staying good mothers, teachers staying good teachers. Don't step out of line. You know what I mean? Or else everybody else has a big effing problem to deal with. And it's that this gear is starting to stick and it needs to be taken out and replaced. And this is what Lacan's big bent was. Lacan was the big voice against this whole thing. He was like, the very most basic fundamental sort of position of subjectivity, for subjectivity to be a consistent concept at all, is for it to be confronted with an imposition and then to reject or question that imposition. Oh, be a good teacher. What is a teacher? Why do I be a good teacher? What are you talking about? Why should I? Who says? The thing that 1930s psychoanalytics in the IPA, not the India Pale Ale, but the International Psychoanalytic Association, who booted Lacan for his heresy, they proposed that, or often use the term hysterical. Oh, this woman's hysterical. Oh my God, these women are so hysterical, right? And Lacan, I think, tried to take on the term hysteria in a more interesting way that I think is not so demeaning and stupid, if you don't mind my being blunt. Hysterical in the sense, not that you're, I think he's trying to say, how are you using the word hysterical to define these people, these poor women, that you're calling hysterical, and then lobotomizing because they're promiscuous, or because they refuse to be a good teacher or a good mother, because they refuse what you're telling them to do. Like Rosemary Kennedy. Remember Rosemary Kennedy getting lobotomized? Wasn't that weird? Good example of that.
Well,
I mean, so I'm saying he's trying to say that it's just a rejection of a social imposition or injunction, and that it's a very basic position of a subject. And so it's not a person's fault necessarily that they're hysterical. It's a natural thing to be hysterical. It's very natural to be hysterical. In fact, it's a sign of being quite reasonable that you would be hysterical, to reject this social injunction or imposition. Sorry, Ed, that's all I'm saying. And so that's where my questions start coming up with this whole social harmony and good and discord and stuff. You know what I'm saying?
there have been very authoritarian, totalitarian societies who can use language like that, but I don't, because of the misuse of certain concepts or ideas, doesn't seem to me to totally invalidate the potential validity of those concepts. And so I don't view Spinoza as a proto-Nazi. If he had a sense of, well, maybe there is a harmonious, there is a basis for a harmonious community.
Right, I'm with you, and I want to know how he gets away from this. You know what I mean? Because I'm not saying that he's a proto-Nazi, right? And I'm looking into the chat, and I think there's I agree. The use of threat rather than reason, la la la. People act from emotion more than reason, so a state has to enforce order by addressing citizens' emotions. I suppose I can understand that, but I guess I'm still trying to understand how how a harmonious society is good. I guess this enforced state harmony, or maybe would he say that a state can even produce a harmonious society? Would he say that a state is kind of antithetical to harmony? I don't know. I'm totally twisted up. I don't know, and I need somebody to help me out here.
I mean, it seems like the basic thing, like I said, is that, you know, we're motivated by emotion more than reason. And so if the state does not, I think his argument seems to be basically, if the state doesn't enforce some kind of order, on his analysis, people are going to be pursuing their own selfish interests without any real concern about the structure of society, and you're going to get anarchy. I mean, that seems to be the basic idea. That if everyone was rational, you wouldn't have this problem, because you could just reason with them, and people would see that, because on his analysis, if you appeal to reason, everybody's best interest is served by everybody helping one another and working cooperatively and so on. But because the bulk of society does not operate rationally, that if you don't have the state enforce some sort of rational structure, that the whole thing's going to fall into chaos. And I have some friends, they're actually more my son's friends, but who are they call themselves anarchists. But when you ask what they mean by that, what they really mean by that is something like flat democracy. It doesn't mean that there are no rules at all. It just means the rules are made by the people. So even at least the few anarchists I know don't claim that you can literally have no rules at all. They're saying you've got to have some rules. It's just we want the rules to be established by flat democratic process, which probably would never work in a community over 250 people. But that's and so it doesn't seem to me to be that controversial a claim to say that, and maybe it's just that I have a dark view of human nature. Maybe, I don't know, I don't think of myself as a Hobbesian, but at least a dark picture of human nature. I mean, like one of the things I'll ask students, sorry, somehow I made myself bleed. I'm going to blame it on Hunter. But that if what happens when when law and order breaks down, due to an environment, like a tornado or a flood or social unrest, and people just go ape shit crazy. They start burning shit and breaking into things, and they just go bonkers. And at least Plato would say, well, there you go. That's kind of what happens if you really have no governing no government that's regulating behavior, because people, his way of putting it was, we have very poorly regulated appetites and desires, most of us, and because of that, and even I'm guessing, I'm not sure about if Eric would say this, but even Kant seems to admit that most of us are governed. I mean, actually, a lot of this section, there were sections in here that sounded to me a whole lot like Kant when he was talking about essentially autonomy. But then he seemed to admit that very few of us are actually autonomous in the Kantian sense, that most of us are heteronomous, that most of us are responding to our desires, our emotions, external forces. And so if that's the case, if people as a rule are not autonomous, are not rational autonomous agents, what you going to do? I mean, that seems to be Spinoza's basic observation.
I agree with what you just said, with one qualification, because I read Spinoza's concept of desire as being more expansive than that. Not every desire is kind of an appetite, like what Kant would talk about with, in terms of appetites. those given to us by the order of nature. Strictly speaking, I want to say Spinoza opens up the possibility of desire for like the understanding of God, or he hasn't seemed to get there yet. Maybe later, but a desire to behave in the rational way rather than in the what the appetite dictates.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. But I think that general kind of explanation you gave, Nevin, I think that is right. And so yeah, so Hobbes is all over this. Even though he has some differences with Hobbes, definitely, which are quite interesting. But I think to really first understand it, you have to kind of understand the Hobbesian angle that he's coming from. But okay, well, saying that, but I think probably the first thing to do, because our first impulse is, he's a Nazi, he does all this. So it's kind of okay. He's not an absolutist in the sense of the state as, absolute rule, like whatever this arbitrary, I feel like, imposing, I don't know, whatever, make it up, just make something up. I'm going to do it. That's there we go. Look at him. Spinoza, Leviathan. It's said he's got, criteria about like what reason is. And he's saying that, okay, the idea about what virtue is leading towards this criteria of reason, right? So what is the state's role in that? It's kind of complex because the state isn't itself necessarily rational. It can kind of use rational means in a sense, but so he says that it uses these kind of useful fictions that induce fear or hope against what? Against irrational people, theoretically. So the idea is that, okay, where the real discord would be, this theoretical state of nature. So from there, you've got these affects that determine people to kind of go in their own direction, pursue virtue through this way that is not really virtuous, because they're doing things based off of not how things are kind of how they would concur with other people's interests, which is that's gonna be what reason's all about. Is if I can pursue my own interest in a way that is really my interest, it would be in the interest of all humans. So that's going to be what reason really wants.
Universalizability.
So, say what?
A criterion of universalizability.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And so in order to get there, he thinks the state is necessary to first kind of put us on the path towards some kind of greater cohesion where we can start to agree with each other more. So that means having to even adopt, some arbitrary conventions in order to, whatever, let's go along with it. Even something, okay, I think like certain religious observations, I think he would see those as having some social utility to a certain extent, but that they're not actually universalizable. So I was reading some of, you probably can't see as the background, but the theological political treatise a little bit. And it's kind of, which obviously this it talks more about his position on the state and religion and whatnot in the Bible. It's interesting. He wrote it when he was like 25 or something. But yeah, anyways, I think, yeah, what he's going for is we need the state as some kind of like an initial thing to kind of get people that are not rational, or I mean, nobody is perfectly rational, but nobody's also perfectly irrational. But to try to get those people, instead of, you know, just completely following their own affects based off external causes and whatnot, instead to try to concord with each other in terms of how they're actually being affected, so that they can start to agree more with each other, which I think he sees that's important, because ultimately, as being humans, we would agree with each other completely, but how do we get there? We have to sometimes use things that are not really totally rational themselves, in the sense that reason doesn't follow from fear or hope. That's what the state uses as its means. So that means the rational person doesn't really need a state, because they don't need fear, they don't need hope. So theoretically, you could have a kind of Spinozist anarchism of highly, highly irrational people. But realistically, I don't think Spinoza would say that's quite unlikely, and that there's instead the state is a kind of necessary evil. But so I think, there's a lot of connections here with Locke too, as much as I generally dislike him. But okay, so one thing about Spinoza I think is important is that, so like many people at his time and place, I think you'd see this especially in Hobbes, they are very distrustful of rebellion and revolution because of what they actually saw. And so Spinoza, he was excommunicated from his church when he was 23, which is, I think it would be difficult to understand how devastating and how insane that is, when you're, it's not like just like, oh, I have to go move to a different city. It's like everything your entire family is just gone, and you have to go live by yourself. That's insane. But then on top of that, he tried to kind of, make allies with certain people, certain groups, found some in these kind of liberal, humanistic, Christian kind of Protestant people. And then they publicly beheaded one of them, I think. Something crazy. It was like this massacre kind of thing on the streets of mob justice. And that was Spinoza's friend and his patron. And that, I think, had a pretty profound effect on Spinoza. And that's part of the reason, on top of the fact that there's these revolutions going on in England and in Netherlands that had some pretty violent consequences. And he saw that as, this is not good. The best state is one that can maintain its power, but maintain it in order to have some kind of peace. And so that's going to be the kind of presupposition, I guess, it's going to dominate a lot of people at this time, so they see rebellion as something that is, this could fundamentally break into something, again, like another English Civil War, something else like that, where or they go in. Well, I think even something like, okay, try to compare it to our modern day, okay, what if the people, the Trump people that stormed the Capitol, actually just like killed everybody, not everybody, but I guess what the people that agree with them, why not everybody? And it was like, okay, that's it. There's your rebellion right there. Something like that, I think, was probably more of like a possibility in Spinoza's time, and that's the kind of thing that he was fearing. And even somebody like Hobbes also, well, that's so much dominated by the English Civil War, even though he wrote the Leviathan, I think, like right before that. But oh yeah, I think that just has to be considered. I think I had some other point, but I'll just I think I've talked long enough, so yeah.
Well, then just let me ask real quick. I mean, I had this comment earlier where I was basically proposed this idea where it seems like if you lived in a society that wasn't good, and you, as even if you were the perfect rational autonomous agent, were like, hey, this thing is not good and we need to change this thing. It seems like Spinoza is building the case that the state is justified to stop you changing that thing, and that you are bad for trying to change it for the sake of this harmony. And it seems like what you said is supporting that, but you gave me a thumbs down. So I'm trying to figure out what I'm missing here.
Yeah, so I think the thing is, so if the society is not good, then indeed you do have a right to even rebel against that for certain things, against your natural right. So even Hobbes had this idea that, so the one thing for Hobbes that the state could not do was kill you, basically. You always have the right to preserve your life, even though the sovereign could be completely justified in indeed saying you should die, but then still you should not actually give in to that. So that's kind of the one thing. So Spinoza keeps that, but also maintains this idea that we never really actually lose our natural right or our power. So really, when it comes down to it, if the government is actually restraining that, then and indeed then at that case it would be not good by his definition of it. Then at that point, you're just back in the state of nature, kind of like Hobbes too, where okay, if the sovereign is not actually doing the job of keeping the peace by having this power, then we're just back in the state of nature where we just fear the sovereign. So I think Spinoza has a concept like that too, where if the society at that point is not good, then you're basically just back in the state of nature. And the idea is then, okay, we need to then have, a real society now, because so I think one of the things that he's going to say is that pretty much as irrational as people are, almost every society is going to be good in some sense. Well, specifically in the sense that they help us preserve our being. They help us survive. I think he thinks that is completely necessary. And that's why, which I think if you understand kind of like I know this was even more of a thing, say in ancient Greek, when Plato and Aristotle were writing, that to be exiled meant death. And if you show up as a foreigner having been exiled, you go to some other city state, why the hell do they want you? So I think it's somewhat similar still for Spinoza, but he thinks, yeah, if we don't have any kind of a civil society that is actually good in the sense of preserving our way of being, then we're at a very, very bad state at that point. So almost every society is relatively good, even though you can have definitely some bad stuff in there, but he thinks that overall, yeah, societies are going to be good, even when they're bad in some sense.
But so you wouldn't be justified in trying to correct the bad thing because the state is going to enforce the bad thing. It's just part of its apparatus. That's what the state does, right? It enforces it until someone tries to make a change.
The state is going to enforce its laws.
Right. And so, but
Well,
even in the
bad-
mostly good,
Well, I mean, I think Chase is correct in that. I mean, to me, Augustine, Hobbes, Spinoza, I mean, I think they're all saying, given human beings as they are, there's only really two choices, right? Human beings without a government and human beings with government. And given those two realistic choices, what would be, I'll use my phrase, what would be less bad, not in a moral sense, but less onerous for people?
I get what you're saying, but I don't know if that really like addresses like you don't have to have the state we have today or anarchy. We could always make positive changes we have throughout history. But it seems to be the case that like the argument I gave earlier, as someone who studied a lot of US history, if you go back and look at the writings between abolitionists and people who wanted to maintain slavery, this like harmonious society argument was used all the time, even by people who thought that slavery was not a good thing, especially after the Haitian Revolution. Because they were like, look, guys, if we let the slaves go, they're just going to kill everybody. We can't have that. That's going to sow anarchy and chaos in the streets. Nonetheless, we all decided, despite whatever problems and discord it may cause for society as a whole, we ought to free the slaves, right? And it seems to there's some line here where it's like you could even make the argument that America with slavery was a mostly good society, whatever that blurred line kind of looks like, the approximate truth, if you will, of that. And that's where I get caught up in all this. Is that to me, it seems to be the case that if this is going to be taken on its face as a rule, then we've got these sticky scenarios where it seems to be that we just have to like kind of accept some things about the state that may not otherwise be ethically justifiable because we don't live in perfect societies. We don't live in a perfect Spinozan society right now. And to make changes would, to some level, create discord in the world. So I'm trying to figure out what that balance is, especially with this idea of like societies being mostly good. I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, so I think you're right that he would say that there is some level that we need to actually tolerate a kind of lesser of two evils kind of thing, where it's almost always going to be the lesser of two evils indeed to stay in a state rather than to kind of fully rebel and break it down. But there's also so for Spinoza, there's mechanisms to have some kind of change about how things are going on. So if you have something bad, so okay, he was a big believer in the freedom of speech and thought and whatnot, and he writes for quite a bit in the Theological Political Treatise about how it's good for society to have this. How if you suppress freedom, thought, debate, this kind of thing, that is going to lead towards a irrational society led by irrational leaders that's not good. So he definitely believed that there were mechanisms that they didn't fully endanger the state enough to risk going back to the state of nature, but they were able to elicit some kind of rational change for it. So yeah, I think there's definitely no kind of certain surefire kind of rule for anything. It's all highly complex, like in real life. But yeah, I think to Okay, so the thing is, he thought though, okay, once the state has these laws, then you should follow them, because to then decide like, okay, I'm going to break this law but not this one, he thought that that would endanger the state. So he, like Hobbes, although not quite as extreme as Hobbes, he's going to say, yeah, follow the laws, but you can still at the same time debate about them all you want, and the state should actually preserve that right to debate about them. Otherwise, it actually is risking its own dissolution through that. Where Hobbes would say, no, there's no debate. You obey the sovereign and you obey the laws. Otherwise, the sovereign can do whatever the sovereign wants to, in order to do what it wants. Well, the idea is to maintain its power in order to keep the peace and keep us out of the state of nature. So yeah, and it's supposed to be a kind of, social contract, a rational kind of agreement that we've made for the benefit of society as a whole. Though personally, I'm a little skeptical of pretty much all social contract theories, but that I think that's at least Spinoza's position generally.
Yeah, I think this is probably just a me thing at the end of the day. I don't think like there's no contradiction with Spinoza's ideas. I'm more so just, complaining about implications. Like it seems to kind of just spit in the face of like, there's a big, I wouldn't say, what's the word I'm looking for? There's kind of like an admiration or a virtuous character of this idea of like the civil disobedience in contemporary political philosophy and ethics, where it's like if the state is doing a bad thing, civil disobedience is like a virtuous way of you standing up to whatever the bad thing that they're doing is. And it seems like Spinoza would directly just shut that down. So, I mean, if we're okay with that implication, then I suppose, go ahead, trudge forward Spinoza. It's just something that really stood out to me as there's like a really strong focus on the individual and doing what is good and avoid and mitigating or coming to understand to avoid what is bad. And then this kind of like pivot towards the state as this like superseding force. It completely makes sense in the historical context. It just seems to be kind of like a break in the overall narrative that we've kind of been building to like, okay, but now we have to make sure that we don't have these kinds of awful revolutions, which is fine. I get that from like a pragmatic perspective. I'm just trying to work through all of it.
But it wasn't just someone like Spinoza who would be concerned about civil disobedience. You can just look at a contemporary of Dr. King and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Thurgood Marshall brought it up, saying, okay, Martin, this law is bad. And so you're going to break it. And even though you're willing to be punished and be put to jail, why are you doing that? Because you want the law changed. You want a new law. Well, okay, then what if someone disagrees with the new law? I mean, Marshall was always uncomfortable with the civil disobedience part of the civil rights movement. And part of it was his legal training, but he was risking his life going into the South in the 1930s, representing people in horrific conditions. And I can understand why someone who is sympathetic to change would still say, I don't think civil disobedience is a good idea. There's other ways to go about changing your polity rather than a big group of you breaking the law.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to talk about like efficacious strategies, I think there's tons of options. You can back. It's different now. I was going to say email your representative or congressperson. You can really do that back then, but I think just speaking from like the ethics of it, if there was someone who just blatantly, flagrantly broke segregation laws for whatever reason. I think, we have all sorts of troubles and implications that comes to the law, but just speaking about the ethics of it, I would say that's typically a good thing. But this is, I'm coming back to the whole, like, this is maybe just my ethics versus Spinoza's is just not jiving. Maybe it's not that big of a deal for the text itself, but it's interesting getting to dig into the nuances of where the state falls into this kind of hierarchy of ethical goods and bads for him.
Well, but I'm glad Chase brought up the difference between Spinoza and Hobbes, because I don't think Spinoza writes the state a blank check and says, because we're pieces of shit, without the state, we're just going to be at each other's throat. It's going to be what's the new phrase? Not Hell Night, but the purge. It's not gonna turn into a perpetual purge. I think that Spinoza has a better, not better, I apologize, has a different sense of human capability and human characteristics. Hobbes is so emphasizing the desire, right? The desire for power as being so overwhelming that it's really only the fear of death. And I guess, Chase, tell me what you think. But to me, when I read Hobbes's first part of the Leviathan, first two parts, there's an implicit, a second reason besides the fear of death for why people can leave the state of nature is Hobbes is implicitly saying there's some capacity for reason, right? That people can look at if present trends continue, kind of thing, that kind of reasoning, right? And that's enough, along with the fear of death, that you can have the social contract and then have the civil society. But it's I don't view Spinoza and Hobbes having the same sense of human characteristics.
Yeah, I think one thing that where they would disagree, so this would be for desire. So you can have desires that are, if they're determined by affects, that would be something. So this would be specifically affects of a passive nature. If they're determined by external forces, that means they're always going to be kind of working under the cue of some kind of external condition and not out of their own nature, which would be to preserve itself, which would also be to preserve all of humans. So Spinoza thinks that you can have these good desires that are in accord with reason. And that's how we need to go, even though the state is kind of something that it's kind of something like a rational way of using irrational means in order to make irrational people less irrational. But that itself is not sufficient to actually make them rational. It would just make them fearful enough where they don't go, I don't know, just like murdering people or whatever because they're upset or something. But yeah, I think he definitely believes that humans are generally actually predisposed to social cooperation more so, but that indeed it's kind of a question of the variable intensity of the affects, and specifically what these affects are. They active or they passive? That's going to be the determinant about what is going on here. So it's quite complex because he has an idea definitely of how things go bad, but also an idea kind of that's really at the center of, I would say, his whole philosophy is kind of how things actually work out well, how they're good. And that's where, the whole kind of, I think I agree with Christian that yeah, it is kind of a break sort of to have this political thing, but then I can also see how it's also an extension of kind of the whole system of this the philosophy of the ethics, and you can see how these parts they sort of intertwine with each other. The whole you got the metaphysics and ontology, you got an epistemology, and then from here you see how he's working from that and trying to expand into then an ethics where it's first, yeah, it's definitely it's individual, but then he's trying to work from individual to show how, okay, if you understand individual ethics, it necessarily leads to uh, a politics, a social ethics. So yeah, I can kind of see both sides of that, I guess. And at the same time, yeah, it's complex because he's got this very, it can appear, I think, quite simple and almost naive to a certain extent of, it's like, oh, human nature, but I think it's when you get down into the nitty gritty of it, it's really quite complex, and it's so difficult to keep all these things in mind at the same time. But that's kind of Spinoza's demand of the reader in a lot of ways. So I don't know. It's difficult, but that's what we signed up for, right?
I push back on that just a little bit, Chase. He does seem to be laying out in a geometric way so that it's easy for reference and it's there in pages. You know what I mean? Like you don't necessarily need to memorize this whole system. I've written it in such a way with so many cross references as I go along that if in case you've forgotten such and such proposition, I will remind you this follows from proposition to proposition. You know what I mean? Just that small point about he seems to assume that you need to grasp his whole system and keep it in your mind all at once. He seems to present it in such a way where otherwise, the opposite. You know what I mean? It seems to be able to be digested in small chunks, but be able to brought together under one umbrella for the reader as they go through it.
Yeah, I think he's, the geometric method, he thought this is the best way to convince people of the point I'm trying to make. And so, he's going to operate with trying to use all these, the logical force of, logic, validity, to try to make his point and kind of construct a system. But I think at the same time, it works through this kind of, oh God, I want to say like dialectic almost between, it's following some kind of order, but then we constantly have to keep synthesizing it ourselves and keeping these things in mind where of course it's not possible that he can in this linear way constantly remind us of everything. So yeah, it's difficult to do that because if I were to do that, it's every time say he says good in this, sometimes he will point out like, okay, got this from part 3, proposition 2 or whatever, but he doesn't always say that. And I don't know about y'all, but when he makes he refers back to these propositions and whatnot, I usually will not look at them unless I'm really confused about what it's doing. Then I may look at it. But for the most part, I'm a busy person. I guess I can't really do it, So yeah. Although I would advise people to do that if they're confused about what he's arguing, to make sure you actually do try to look at the propositions that he refers back to and whatnot. Yeah.
So I kind of got lost in the weeds, but tell me if this is correct. So he thinks every person, every person has a natural right to preserve their own existence, and that right cannot be abridged. So that if a state does something or establishes a law that infringes my right to self-preservation, then that law I am not obligated to obey that law. Is that correct? So then if that's correct, and if he believes that rational agents to get, I mean, I'm kind of thinking about, Kant in the background of like I was asking Eric these questions about if we are not, we're not obligated to obey a law that violates the categorical imperative, but maybe Spinoza doesn't have that, but he has this fundamental right of self-preservation, which can function relative to a state in a similar way. So the state cannot legitimately infringe my right to self-preservation, and also, would he also say then cannot infringe my right, or the right, I'm thinking out loud here, or the rights of a group of rational agents to, for their own mutual self-preservation, because he says, I can preserve myself better if all the rational agents around me preserve their lives as well. And so it seems like you could construct a basis for civil disobedience for not, for disobeying the law based on laws that violated those principles of self-preservation for individuals and for groups of individuals. So that if that's the case, then that would mean there would be justification for something like civil disobedience, and certainly justification for working for change if you could create a good argument that shows this behavior by the state or these laws by the state are actually counter to the the preservation of these people.
I have a question then, because I think that's so right. I'm going to assume that the answer is yes, that sounds good, because if it doesn't, then I'm completely lost, because I love that. I think that sounds right. And then I have a question.
Remember, the premise is self-preservation. For someone to engage in civil disobedience, they're willing to be punished for the violation of the law they're committing. So to me, it would be nonsensical to say a law is going to condemn me to death. I'm going to disobey it, but then I'm going to accept the punishment of death because that's what I was rejecting, because it threatens my existence.
But I'm not sure. I mean, I defer to Chase here. I'm not sure he would say I am obligated to follow a law that threatens my existence.
No, but I was focusing on the term civil disobedience. Hobbes would say, if the government is going to try to kill you, right, then yes, you have a right to flee the jurisdiction of that government that's trying to kill you. I would not call that civil disobedience. I would just say, because you're not doing it very publicly, you're trying to get on the first ship out of England or France or something and go to another jurisdiction. So I'm just calling, not all people who break the law are engaged in civil disobedience.
For sure, but I mean that makes sense, because not all, it's not justifiable to break any and every law, but it is justifiable perhaps to break laws that challenge your ability to preserve your own existence. Yeah, I mean, I don't see, at least I'm not seeing any problem with that from Spinoza.
I would say, I would agree with Ed. I think the point Ed was making earlier, it doesn't seem that Spinoza has much support for civil disobedience that threatens one's life. If you know that engaging in a certain act of civil disobedience would lead to punishment of death, then Spinoza would recommend against that. Whereas if you're protesting against, if there's a law issued by the state that threatens your well-being or your existence, then you have every right to resist that. But that's it's already been placed upon you. Something threatens your existence, so you press against it. But if nothing is threatening your existence, and what I'm thinking more specifically, like if you were to advocate for others and sacrifice one's own life, I don't think Spinoza has much in the way of support for that. I think if you're advocating for your own self-preservation, then everything follows from that right. But if you benefit from institutional racism and you want to put that aside and sacrifice your whole life to remedy this situation, I don't see that as supported in Spinoza, because
Right.
your existence benefits from this institution.
Right, and so this is the big difference between, I think, what is maybe more palatable by a contemporary perspective and what Spinoza is trying to lay down, not as like this is it, this is all you're allowed to do, but this is at least, I think that's the thing that I think if we interpret this as being basically the limit of what we're allowed to do, then I can understand some not rejection, but misgiving, but I think that this is more of like a minimum. It seems to me more like this is like a minimum. Like if your life is threatened and that if your self-preservation minimally, if your very constitution as a body, as a proportion of body in coherence, as a coherent structure, if that is threatened, absolutely, you totally have the right to go against that. Totally have the right to go against that. But it doesn't. I don't know if it does. Would he advise against? Right? Does this preclude? Does this go against? Like you're saying, like, or does it go against and advise against, or does it leave room for something like a struggle for freedom in the interest of the preservation of the freedom of another in view of the relational care? I'm bringing Hegel in, basically. I'm trying to say here, are we so different, you and I? Are we so different? If you see like your neighbor being beaten up by the police and dragged out of his home, and then a big FEMA sign is put on the front door, and it's like, okay, well, he didn't get killed, so I guess I should do nothing. And then let's say you see this scene of violence and this guy gets dragged out of his house, and 6,000 of your neighbors say, hey, we're thinking about voicing our disagreement with what just happened to your neighbor. Would Spinoza say, don't do that? You have no right to do that. Hey, watch out there, mister. No, it's not threatening your preservation. Don't go out there and challenge those police. They're not threatening yourself. Like, because I feel like if you take it that far, it's getting into this sort of non-aggression principle, like hard limit stuff. But it seems more to me, or at least it makes more sense to me, that it would be sort of like a bare minimum. And opening up one's perception to the patterns in front of oneself and the actions taken by the state and their threats of violence, and resisting those threats of violence, it doesn't seem like it's precluded. You know what I'm saying? Like Hegel is saying, your freedom is only valid insofar as it is recognized by the community of other free individuals around you. And if you recognize that 99.9% of your entire neighborhood has had their freedom utterly jettisoned from the equation, and they're all locked up in solitary confinement, there's probably a reason to believe that there's some threat to your freedom, and maybe not your body. You might get thrown into a little box. And so you won't die. But it's not totally unreasonable that you would have some problems with that, and in fact potentially resist the encroachment onto those freedoms, right? You know what I'm saying? Like that's what I'm saying. I feel like that is a Spinoza that is, that, or not like that is that's a better Spinoza, so I think it's what he's saying. It's just, I think that seems to me to be a more a position that I think is closer aligned to what we've been talking about, but I don't know. I don't really have a lot of textual support for that. So maybe I am kind of projecting. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Okay, so I'll go. Okay. Um, so I think Nevitt's comment that he has there about the reason and the good, preserving one's existence, that is kind of the key to follow. So I think, yeah, it is pretty obvious that, yeah, if we're threatened our own personal life, yeah, we have our natural right. Um, that's not too controversial. But then, yeah, so what about if it's kind of more indirect? It's not maybe me personally myself right now, but it's someone else. So then I think you've got some complex, subtle criteria to work through, especially for, kind of like a hypothetical like that. But I think there's definitely a case to be made that for something to be, guided by reason, that would mean that, okay, this is something that would be good for all humans. Then if something, say, targets a group of humans, even though I'm not directly in the membership of that group, that because it's targeting of, some segment of humans, is this segment really actually, are they threatening the preservation of society, or my life, the life of the society? If the answer is no, then I would say that trying to eliminate them or whatnot, that would be highly irrational and evil. Because, I mean, if you're killing people and there's no reason to do it, and by reason that it preserves the being of the society, then I would say that there's no reason to do it, and you should in fact try to resist it, because that society at that point is no longer preserving your existence, really. And you can understand, I think, that in an indirect way more so. But okay, let's go with the theme of this. Actually, what just came to my mind, I can't remember who this quote is from, but it's about the Holocaust, so it's something like, okay, first, they came for the Jews, like Spinoza was, well, ethnically, not religiously, because he was excommunicated. Then they came for, okay, well, with the communists, the peace activists and whatnot. And, you go down this chain, eventually, oh yeah, they came for me and there's nobody left to defend. I think that, it's almost like kind of cliche now, but I think you could use that as like, okay, that is pretty rational thinking. That, I think it's an irrational way of thinking, in almost every sense of the term, to think that, oh, my in group that I identify with, where Spinoza doesn't think highly of universals like that. If that I could only need to be concerned with that in group, and anything outside of that, whatever, it doesn't bother me. You would see that as highly irrational. Because you need to be paying attention to kind of the whole ecosystem of your society to understand the health of it. And yeah, so I think you can understand that, yeah, if you take some kind of segment of it and you threaten that, that's actually a threat. That's a threat very much to the entire whole of the society, if you're arbitrarily kind of taking that. But the complexity, I think, would really come down to kind of what is the severity of it? Because he would probably say, okay, say come with some kind of ridiculous scenario, but say you've got some society but for some reason inexplicable, they decide to go after redheaded people whose last name starts with the Z, like extreme, numerical minority. Absurd. So if then it came down to, okay, we've got to say, let's make it dramatic, let's execute all these redheaded people whose last name starts with a Z, I could either go along with that or the entire society falls apart because we're rebelling against that. It's a ridiculous kind of scenario, but I think that's where complexity would come in the sense that, okay, at that point, I think if you're saying that it's such a small minority, then it would be kind of like a lesser of two evils kind of thing. And you would just have to choose based off of what you think. I mean, I'm talking not in Spinoza's terms anymore, but talking about choosing and all this stuff. But, what would come down to it is ultimately what really furthers your existence, which means what furthers the existence of the society as a whole. And then hypotheticals kind of break down at that point because hypotheticals are overly simplistic and absurd, like my example. So yeah, I don't think Spinoza would say this, but I'd say, yeah, there's inherent ambiguity in every decision like this. We never know. Well, at least for a lot of things. I think a lot of things you can still kind of affirm resistance based off of rational principles, and in many senses of the term rational. Oh, yeah. I feel like there's so many qualifications to everything I'm saying that it's just, oh God,
I don't think that's a reflection of you. I mean, I think that might be a reflection of how Spinoza is approaching these topics.
I have to say, I think Hunter said it towards the beginning, but at the beginning, I was kind of reading Spinoza just as a like historical filling in the gaps, from here to here to here. So more of his, but also like I want to understand it. But early on, there's no danger of me turning into a Spinoza. There's certain things that I just can't buy into already. So it's just as a curiosity. But then as at some point or another, I start resisting. Like, no, dude, you're so far off base. Now how can I take him seriously? Right. But the past 2-3 weeks, I've grown in admiration and really respect. And like I think like Nevitt pointed out, this week's reading resonates a lot with my inner Kantian. And it makes a lot of sense to me in terms of the project I'm working on. Although I would disagree with some finer points, I can appreciate with broad strokes what he's doing as against his milieu. And I want to say that's, something that Kant picks up later on, right? The role of reason in the world to make it a better world, just crudely put. But I just wanted to finish with saying, I think Spinoza is now, I favor Spinoza over Descartes, and I like what I've read of Spinoza more than Leibniz and Locke. So I'm going to put him right next to Hume in pre-Kantian philosophers that I admire, and I quite admire Hume.
That's that's really interesting. Yeah. So I was reading the Beth Lord's guide to Spinoza's ethics, and she also makes the connection with Kant's certain of Kant's ideas for this section. Which is interesting because well, it's pretty complex because I see so many connections with Nietzsche. And so the way that and okay, so the connection with Nietzsche and Spinoza is coming from especially how Deleuze puts them together. But the thing is, he puts in his Nietzsche book, he puts Nietzsche as kind of not only anti-dialectical, but as the true critical philosopher. That Kant showed the way, but Kant didn't actually follow it through because Kant didn't actually fully critique kind of his own critique in a way. And so I think of it something like that, but I don't know, actually trying to really follow the Spinoza closely and seeing how, the way that Beth Lord kind of points it out too, I kind of see more how the Kant is kind of actually kind of works with it some more. But then yeah, I don't know a great deal about Kant, I'll admit, although I would like to learn more. Oh yeah, but that's an interesting assessment. I would definitely like to learn more Leibniz. Leibniz seems really interesting. And Hume as well. I think Hume is really interesting. But I don't know. Some of these thingers they're really interesting, but it's kind of like you only usually learn one document, like, okay, meditations of Descartes, something like that, which, I mean, totally, I would, if I was teaching like an intro philosophy class, I would probably teach that. It's a great text, really, and I think actually I respect Descartes a lot, but it's difficult to kind of make an assessment of all these things, and I don't know. It seems like Spinoza is he so often gets just kind of neglected. One, because I mean, well, what are you gonna do? Like teach the ethics in your class? Like, there are philosophers that definitely do that, of course, but that would be, let's just say, I would, if I'm going to teach something in my intro class, it's probably going to be Descartes' Meditations and not the ethics. Like, obviously. But I don't know. There's some stuff from Spinoza that maybe is, how do you teach it? I don't. He ends up just getting like put in with the rationalists, as like an extension of Descartes, which I think makes sense definitely on some levels. But it's like his particularity, what is unique about him, usually gets left out. Yeah. I don't know, but I would definitely like to learn more about all these people.
Yeah, one of the things I like about this this group is that it quote forces me to read, or gives me the opportunity to read people that I have these big gaps in my background, and so like I would be up for Leibniz because I just don't know a lot about Leibniz, and and the same was true for Spinoza. So I'm happy to read these people because it helps fill in those gaps, and they are all important. You see, even if they're not being name checked all the time like some are, they've all had an important influence on later philosophy, even into the present. So and they all have interesting ideas. So I am glad that you guys are willing to read some of these books that people want to relegate to the mere history of philosophy. It's just history. Who wants to read history?
Yeah. People do that with Schopenhauer a lot now. So there was a while where he was really popular, really the most popular German philosopher other than Kant. And then he kind of fell out of fashion, and now he's not really taken that seriously. There's not a whole bunch of Schopenhauerians kind of going around saying like Schopenhauer, you know. There are anti-natalists and pessimists though that are influenced by him and whatnot. Where I don't know, we'll see, because that's one of the strange things about Schopenhauer is, so the connection with Nietzsche. A lot of people that are just want to understand Nietzsche end up having to learn Schopenhauer, and then you get this tension there from the fact that on some things they're saying the complete opposite, other things they completely agree, other things it's kind of all over the place. So you have a lot of people reading Schopenhauer that are maybe already, you know, thinking like, oh God, this is that evil pessimist guy who's he's gonna make me try to kill myself or something. Oh, by the way, so just because I brought it up, he does not advocate for suicide. I'll just say that. Which I don't know, maybe I kind of saw that as, okay, well, why not? You know, if you're really going to follow your thinking the whole way through, why not? Bob Solomon downplay. I think he did a little. Yeah, I think so.
I want to
Yeah.
say, but I'm not 100%. I was asked.
I don't remember. I know Kathleen Higgins, his wife, likes Schopenhauer. She teaches Schopenhauer sometimes. Actually, they co-taught a course when I was there on Hegel, Nietzsche, and Schopenhauer. So they at least have, you know, they both had respect for Schopenhauer, but I don't know. He could be. I mean, because, you know, Bob Solomon really, well, and Kathleen Higgins too, really downplay the role of will to power in Nietzsche, and that might be why they, you know, push Spinoza aside more, is because of the whole will thing. They insist that the will to power is not a big part of Nietzsche.
I remember, yeah. So when I was first really getting into Nietzsche, the great courses, you know, the teaching company, it's Bob Solomon and Kathleen Higgins. They have a whole course on Nietzsche. They go through all the stuff, and the will to power episode was, I remember, like, there's all this historical misinterpretation of what it means, and I thought he was referring to the Nazis, which I think he was partially, but I don't know why, kind of darkly, kind of humorous, that I realized he's talking about Heidegger, who was a Nazi. So yeah, he's talking not only about the literal, you know, like
Heidegger, who was also a Nietzsche scholar.
Yeah, and so at a very influential one about how
commentary.
Yeah, and so Heidegger's reading of Nietzsche really emphasized the will to power, but in a particular way, where, okay, so it wasn't like, not that Heidegger's interpretation of Nietzsche was actually really overtly kind of fascist, but I think some people have said that, okay, yeah, you could see how this could be spun into something like that. But then it's very ambiguous, and Heidegger, a lot of Heidegger's thought himself is kind of like that too. We're like, being in time, pretty abstract, but you can kind of get a sense of what's going on there. Does it really advocate, you know, fascism or whatever? Very much debated still. But even the stuff when he was very much a literal Nazi, even that is pretty ambiguous too. And I think the Nietzsche stuff goes in there too. But yeah, there's a lot of complex, you know, historical baggage going on with all this Nietzsche stuff. I think Bob Solomon was kind of, you know, taking in a lot of that.
Yeah, they didn't like Heidegger either. So the only when I was there, I only knew one guy that wrote a dissertation on Heidegger under the direction, I think, of Solomon, and the whole thing was why Heidegger is a terrible person and philosopher. That was basically his dissertation. So there was only one guy at UT when I was there who taught Heidegger, and he was in the architecture department. So
Yeah.
I have a administrative question. I'm thinking about the reading schedule for the world for Schopenhauer, and I posted on Discord some excerpts from the Critique of Pure Reason that Alistair Welchman and Chase recommended. Welchman he's Chase's advisor, and he also is one of the translators. He and his wife translated this book, and he teaches Schopenhauer. And so the excerpts that I put in there are the ones that Chase and Alistair recommend. I mean, I'm sure we would all be better off if we read the whole thing, the whole Critique of Pure Reason first, but that would put us off for quite a while. So my question is, should we include those? And it might take 2 sessions. I don't know. I haven't looked at. I've been reading some of them. At least to me, the stuff on the transcendental aesthetic is not too difficult. But I haven't looked at the rest of it. But should we do 1 or 2 sessions in the seminar on those passages, or should I just recommend those as background reading and then jump right into the Schopenhauer? So Eric, you're voting for which one?
I say we jump right into the Schopenhauer and and just kind of indicate strongly the Kant for the background reading.
So I think we should put the Kant in the reading schedule, because otherwise people won't do it. Most won't, definitely. I mean, how many? Yeah.
I'll be honest. I'm trying to avoid sitting in your seat, Chase.
Oh yeah, which you should. That would be rational.
Well, I mean, like I said, I think it would at most be 2 sessions. Maybe we could do it in one. I guess I have started reading the Transcendental Aesthetic, and I want to read all those excerpts that I posted on Discord. But maybe, I don't know if you guys want to take a look at them and see if we could get through that in one, or if it's too many ideas and maybe we need to do it in 2. But I'm thinking we could probably. I'm not asking you to tell me right now, but so Eric, maybe you would only be in the hot seat for 1 or 2 sessions.
No, I'll do it for 2 if that's what the group asks for. I'll do it. I mean, if you guys all want to read the Critique of Pure Reason and then push World as well, Schopenhauer, and I'll do it for the sake of the group. But yeah.
Well, Chase actually said we probably ought to read the Critique of Pure Reason first, but I'm begging us to read the Schopenhauer for purely selfish reasons. That I don't.
Well, yeah, you're doing a guided study, right? Through Schopenhauer that's scheduled for the summer.
It's actually scheduled for the fall, and what I'm trying to do is, if I have to read this whole damn book in the fall, that's going to be 40 pages a week. And if I talk the seminar into doing it over the summer and the fall, that's 20 pages a week. And I don't have to, as I told Evan Hahn, the guy who wanted to do this, I don't have to read another friggin' impossible to read book while also trying to read Schopenhauer at the same time. So it's purely selfish on my part to ask the group to read Schopenhauer now, because I'm just trying to reduce my workload a little bit.
Nevit, what was the name that I should look for on the Discord?
So if you go to the Discord and you look at the summer fall philosophy seminar thread under currently active seminars, that thread is very short right now, and up toward the top there are 3 PDF documents: Kant Transcendental Aesthetic, Kant Second Analogy, and Kant Phenomena and Noumena. And
So,
those are the excerpts that Alistair and Chase recommended are kind of the minimum for being a basis for Schopenhauer.
So did you want us to look over those to give you a sense of separate or extracurricular outside of the training?
That, and then also whether we should take 1 or 2 meetings if we put them in the schedule, if we should try to do all that in 1 meeting, or if there's just too much stuff there and we should do it in 2 meetings. Another thing I'm a little confused about, and I asked a question to Eric about this, but the Critique of Pure Reason was released in 2, he Kant released it and then he revised it, and every edition that I'm aware of has both of them in there. Are they interleaved, or are they?
Yes.
They are? Okay.
Okay, yeah, I had a question about that too. Yeah.
Yeah, when you usually, most editions of the critique, I want to say there are parts that he took out when he did the second edition. Those are in there, and they're just A designation, right? There's no A, B. And then there are parts that he added in the second edition, and those are paginated with just B numbers. But the majority of it, you'll see A and B.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when there's like in the Transcendental Aesthetic, there's these there's 2 sections, but it's not that one is A and one is B.
No, it's just these
Okay.
are in the A edition. This is the page number. In the B edition, this is the page
Okay.
number.
Okay.
So what? Yeah, I was confused by that because I was looking at specifically the one on the distinction of the phenomena, noumena, or whatever, and it had so of course it has the A and B, but it has the first edition, which is so many pages, and then separate that as the second edition,
Yeah.
which is similar but it expanded. So I was like, okay, well, can you just read the second edition and just not read the first edition?
Yeah.
Because that would help, I think. Because otherwise it seems like you're kind of reading the same thing over again to a certain degree. Yeah.
So I've just pulled it up now. There's you can see there's a good chunk there that's just A. Right, but most of it's A, B, and then like you go down, there's a good chunk that's just A. So you can look over it, you can see he cut that from the second edition. There's another chunk later, right? Where you just see A numbers to the left or to the right, that's you can just know that's first edition that didn't make the second edition.
But I think can you guys see this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think what Chase is referring to, I put the 2 together. So here's see the Analytic Principles, 3rd chapter on the ground of the distinction of all objects in general and phenomena and noumena. And then if you go down here, you get the same thing, but it's not literally the duplicate, but it's the same material again. So I find that confusing as well. And you've got the AB here and also the AB in the first thing. So I don't understand what's going on there.
Yeah, that's exactly what's confusing me.
Yeah. So I don't understand why there's 2 different, and this is from the Cambridge edition. I don't know what the older one looks like, but this is the Cambridge edition, has this section repeated. So I don't know, maybe Eric, that's on this. I got this is on Discord. So maybe take a look at that and see if, what's up with this. Is the second one new material, or is it just a revised version? I mean, because again, you do see the A and B both here, which sounds like they're interleaved, But then why are there two complete different sections? I don't get that.
Yeah, the second one you see, there's a page that's all B.
Okay.
Mhm.
Right, and there's no sections that are just A. So they're giving you the first and the second edition here, so you can see them separately.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
So we're in on the first go through where you see A and B off to the
Yeah.
left or right, you know that's common to both editions. When
Right.
you see A to the left or to the right, that's unique to the first edition, and that only happens on the first half of this PDF. In the second half of the PDF, you see A and B, you know this section is common to both. And then where you see just B, that's unique to the second edition.
So I'm still confused then. What's the difference between these two?
So they've reproduced the first edition of this chapter and the second edition of this chapter, one after the other. But in their production, of the first, the first half of this PDF is the first edition.
Okay.
So that's why all the pagination is either AB or simply A.
Yeah.
And then the second half is all second edition. But you can look at the pagination, it's either AB or simply B. So when you see where it's just B, you can know that that's not in the first edition. That's unique to the second edition in the second half of the PDF.
Okay.
And similarly, in the first half of the PDF, when you see it's just A pagination, that section is unique to the first edition and it's not included. He cut it. So it's not in the second edition. And so if the question is, should we advise people to read the first edition or the second edition, if we're going to only advise them to read one, then the second one is more, is more faithful to, Kant's purpose, because he did feel like he was clarifying things. However, if the idea is we're going to do some exegesis of Kant himself and argue against other interpretations of Kant, it's helpful to look at the first edition and the revisions made in the second edition, right? But we're not really interrogating Kant and in terms of the various interpretations of Kant.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, that makes total sense now.
So for our purposes, would it be okay then to just recommend reading the second?
Yes.
I think so.
Is that Eric? Does that sound?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Okay. Okay. Well, like Chase said, that'll reduce the reading a bit. So maybe if you guys have time to look at those, and that might have an effect on whether we spend one or two meetings on it. Again, it's not strictly a number of pages though. It's the difficulty and density of the ideas. And I don't know how familiar people are with Kant that are going to be in the group, so like even the group that was there tonight, I don't know how familiar people are with Kant. I just don't know. So I know
that's why I think at least one session to really get the point across with what's in the transcendental aesthetic, I think is really important. So the phenomena noumena stuff, that's really important for Schopenhauer, although I'm not really super familiar with exactly all the details for how Kant is using this. So I probably need to read that, well, obviously, first.
So yeah, definitely for Schopenhauer, noumena is will and representation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Alistair is the one who recommended reading the Transcendental Aesthetic in the second analogy.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I haven't looked at the second analogy at all. I don't know why just that one and not the other two. But
if I remember correctly from when I took the class, the second analogy has to do with succession in time versus, I think, kind of coexistence in space or something like that. And it's very important to causality. And this is going to be what Schopenhauer says about the world of representation, that this is how it works.
is through this way of time and causality and succession working. And yeah, if that make any sense, or that just sound like a bunch of words? I don't know.
Yeah, so here's the excerpt that I found for the second analogy in this, temporal sequence according to the law of causality. So
okay, yeah, so that's pretty important. I mean, I would say, I read this, I remember, and being like, oh my God, this Kant, he's a boring writer. I'm sorry. Okay, well, I'll say this Cambridge edition, I think I don't know what Eric, what do you think of these translations? But this translation I find difficult. Where the Hackett, the Hackett translation I got is a lot easier. It's just is I think the Cambridge one, it's supposed to be really literal, which is good for if you're a Kant scholar or something like that. Or what Alistair told me, if I want to communicate with Kant scholars, which is said, like, I don't know, do I? But yeah.
So should I then, because I've also stolen a PDF version of the older translation. I've forgotten who the translator is. Should I post that one then instead of the Cambridge?
So I don't know about the older one, but it's actually the newer one. That's the newer Hackett version.
Oh, okay. So the Hackett one is not that older.
Yeah, I think that one is just a lot easier.
Okay.
And I can see if I can find a PDF of that one and maybe have people read that. Is why not, I guess. Except for the fact that maybe that you could make a counter argument that Alistair's all about that version, the Cambridge edition of Kant, is like, what, you can't even communicate with Kant scholars if you don't use this edition. And he's the translator, along with his wife of of the Schopenhauers. So I'm not sure if I can't really, I mean, I don't know enough Kant to know exactly what the big differences are in the terminology. So I don't know. All I know is that Hackett version was just a lot easier to read, it seemed like, from the bits that I did read.
Yeah, I have never looked at. I'm looking at the Hackett on the Hackett website now. It's translated by somebody named Werner Pluhar. So
yeah.
Definitely not the older translation that I was thinking of. But I haven't looked, but I haven't found I found a PDF of the really old one, and I found a PDF of this. Although actually, you know what I might be able to do, because I found that a PDF of the an illegal PDF of the Cambridge edition. But what I did to get these was I actually downloaded them off the Texas State website, because Texas State has an electronic version of the Cambridge, and it will allow you to download a certain number of pages. And so all of these that I actually have posted now and I did that because the illegal copy I found had a few pencil marks here and there, whereas this one is a completely clean copy. So what I'll do first is go look on at Alkek and see if they have an ebook version of the Hackett edition, because if they do, then it would be pretty easy to download those. But I just don't know if they have that available or not. I'm not sure. I mean, looking on the Hackett website, it looks like they may not actually have a PDF version. So if they don't sell a PDF version, then probably Texas State doesn't have it, I'm guessing. Because I think they would have to, get the official version from the publisher.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find a copy of that too.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I've got to go.
Okay. Thanks for helping me out with that. We'll talk to you guys later.
Yep. All right. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Be safe.